the session started, the idea for the session started because people wanted to know what happens at a coding interview. So we invited them back to help us do that. Let's take a minute first to have you guys introduce yourselves and what you're doing now.
Sure, I guess I can go first. Other than that wonderful video. Like Mark said, I'm a Bentley graduate in 2014. Did my time in the sandbox, as it were. And then I graduated and went on to work at a company called Wayfair in their engineering team. So I started as a site reliability engineer, sort of grew into more of a management role, and these days I'm leading a few of Wayfair's platform engineering teams. So essentially we provide the computing and networking infrastructure that powers most of the software applications that many of Wayfair's engineers are writing. So a lot of the traffic routing for the website, service-to-service traffic, compute platforms, and I own a lot of our cloud footprint as well.
Hi, Alex Bromley. I've been in software for about 20 years. Started here at Bentley with SQL course and with Mark's VB.NET course, which got me into web programming. And I spent the first 10 years or so of my career with Cold Fusion, which you probably never heard of, helping migrate companies to .NET. And then about 10 years ago, I switched to a language and framework called Ruby on Rails, which I love working in, although it does seem like lately it's got becoming a little bit more of a niche product. But definitely, software's been good to me. Boston's been a great place to do it. I have been through a lot of mergers and acquisitions, which has led to looking for a new job often within 2 to 3 years, although I just finished a 6-year stint at a healthcare company. So I've passed at least 6 or 7 coding interviews, which I can tell you guys is still nerve-wracking, but you can do it. You can prepare for it like anything else. And the more you prepare, it's like a muscle memory. You'll do well, when you're up there, even though, like I said, it can be a little nerve-wracking. So hopefully we can give you guys some tips and tricks from what we've seen today.
So what we thought we'd do today is talk a little bit about coding interviews with Nick and Alex, and then invite one of you to be interviewed by them for a job that doesn't necessarily exist. But we'll put one of you on the spot to come up here and demo and see how you do. And we'll see how it goes. What kind of jobs require coding interviews?
Do you want to take this one?
Sure. Whether I've been interviewing as an individual contributor or for management, I've always been asked at least one algorithm question. So I think you can kind of expect that. I can say at the beginning of my career when interviewing for junior engineer jobs, you get more leeway. You might not even have to make it all the way through. They might give you a couple tips, but you at least have to show your thought process and that you're familiar with looping and assigning some variables and figuring something out. I can say that for the management jobs, they often start to add something kind of like a case study where they'll ask you to design a system. So for my most recent job, they asked me, how would you design the Easy Pass system from the ground up? But yeah, getting back to the topic, really anything that's going to involve coding or managing coders, I think you're typically expected to demonstrate that you understand how to write basic algorithms and solve some basic sorting type problems using code.
Yeah, so it's basically any engineering type of role, software engineering role. If you see software engineer in the title, it's pretty safe to expect you're going to do some level of coding. Basically, what the company's trying to assess is, is what you have on your resume accurate? They want to get an assessment of, do you understand the basics? They don't necessarily want to hire in someone who they then have to train from the ground up or what have you. And then certainly, as you progress in seniority, move up, you may be a senior engineer or staff engineer, the problems get more and more tricky and the standards get a little bit higher as you go through it.
Tell us about it. So set the scene for me. If you're conducting a coding interview, is it you and the candidate or you and somebody else in the candidate? Are you in a room in person or are they mostly done online? If you're online, are you typing together? If you're in person, are you like writing stuff on a whiteboard? What does it look like?
Sure. I mean, I can start, and then maybe you can tell us about your more recent experience. The way it usually works, or the way that I've seen it done at most of the larger tech companies at this point, is that it's going to be you on a virtual call. Maybe it's Zoom, maybe it's Google Meet, maybe it's something else. And you're usually one-on-one with an interviewer, but there might be another person in there. Sometimes different companies approach it in different ways. They'll want someone else to observe, or they'll maybe have someone who's training as a shout-out to the interview, and maybe they'll just be on there quietly. But usually it's you and one other person. There might be a quick warm-up, 5-minute introductions or what have you, and then they're going to present you with one of these like online coding tools, something like a Codility, or there's a bunch of them nowadays. And essentially you're going to be looking at like a blinking cursor terminal of some kind, where they're going to expect you to solve some kind of a problem. And then they'll explain to you what the problem is. Maybe it'll be written out for you. There might be test cases associated with it, just to maybe rule out some various edge cases. But for more senior roles, they probably won't even do that. And then it's basically take the next 45 minutes or whatever time is left to work with your interviewer to solve the problem. Is that generally what you've experienced too?
Yeah, well, it's changed, I think, a lot in the last 4 years or so, kind of starting with the pandemic. So the last time I was interviewing was 6 years ago. It was mostly in person with 2 or 3 people in the room. They would have me go stand at a whiteboard or whiteboard and describe the problem, and I'd have to start writing. Usually they don't care what language. You could write in pseudocode, or if you're familiar with Ruby or Java, most of the time they don't care. It's language agnostic. And I would have to solve it kind of up there in front of folks. There were times when I'd write it out and might be thinking for a minute, and I have even gotten a pointer or a tip from somebody. So it's not like they always expect you to do it 100% by yourself. Sometimes I think they want to see how you interact. Obviously, that's changing, where I think most stuff has gone online or into virtual sessions. I have spoken with friends who were put into a session that was more like pairing. So they went into a conference call where both people could access the screen and even kind of collaborate, which is something that's super common now. I don't know if you guys have heard of pairing very much, but it is a tool that wasn't used so much when I started 15, 20 years ago, but now people do a lot. And it does accelerate, I think, people's development, people's learning, because a lot of times you kind of go down a path in your mind and you end up, at a dead end, and if someone's there with you, they're often able to just see it from a slightly different facet and kind of, jog you to the next bit. So sometimes it might even be a pairing interview, but certainly it has changed a lot in the last 2, 3, 4 years to more virtual. So I'm actually in a job search right now, so I'm going to be finding out pretty soon. I know I have one coming up in Codility. I did get a take-home project for one company, so that was a little bit different. I think it's more of a low-key company. It seems like maybe they pay a little bit less than like the FANG type companies, but at the same time, it's local. It's kind of a family atmosphere, so I'm excited about the opportunity. And I did a take-home project for them in React and Rails. So definitely you'll see different flavors, but most things I think are going to be like Nick described, where you're going to get onto an interactive editor where you can run your code, and you're going to have one, if not 2 or 3 people kind of following along.
And will the interviewer give you hints along the way, or encouragement or feedback at the end to let you know how you did? Or will you know because you didn't get it, because it doesn't work?
Maybe.
So
to your point, a lot of companies do it differently, right? Like, you should be able to know if your code works, right? You'll, in most cases, be able to actually run it, which is great. That's, in my personal opinion, that's easier or better for me than it was trying to like write pseudocode or make up Python on a whiteboard of some kind. But usually, if you have a good interviewer, you can sort of treat them like a resource, as you would not necessarily Google, like they're not going to give you the answer. But if you were going to talk through, you want to try to talk out loud because they're there to try and assess your process, right? They want to get a sense of what you're thinking about, why you've chosen the approach that you've chosen, and sort of work your way through it. So through that, you might get some feedback, depending on if your interviewer is nice to you or maybe wants to give you some hints. So that's definitely a good approach to take in terms of just speaking out loud, trying to leverage your interviewer, and maybe bounce some ideas or things off of them as you're going through it, because they may be willing to give you hints or point you in the right direction. And at the end of the session, you should be able to click the run button and see your application actually output the expected output, and potentially add some test cases if you've got time.
Yeah, I would say along those lines, it does help to try to just be chill and keep things light because, if you do, then I think if they're a little more likely to be interactive and help you.
I'm assuming that depending on the company, you might get some specific questions related to the type of software that the company produces, but there must be some set of general questions that are more common that people often ask. What are the kinds of questions that you like to ask or that you've received?
It's definitely company specific. So some of them will maybe pick something specific to a particular language that the team might be using, or it really focus on a particular subset of like data structures or algorithms that are relevant in that role. There's, if you've ever been on LeetCode or something like that, a lot of those challenges or coding questions tend to follow that same type of format. And usually they're looking for you to demonstrate some like sort of computer science fundamentals and get to the right answer. But there are other places that do it a little bit differently and try to get to maybe a more practical solution as opposed to moving things around within an array or discover the quickest path to some specific variable through some large set of data. They might try to anchor it more in something practical for the job that you're doing. But again, that all sort of depends on the role and the position and the company. If you're looking at sort of the highest level tech companies, your Apples and Amazons and Googles and Facebooks and what have you, they're generally going to be focused more on the data structures and algorithms heavy parts of it. And then they'll be less focused on a specific skill set for a team. You'll basically just be given an option of where you want it to go internally.
Yeah, I would say I've always seen sorting algorithm questions at every company, but some variations might be like I interviewed at a company that was into search engine marketing. They were operating what they called a conversion funnel to take students or people who prospective students and figure out what college to advertise to them online. So they wanted to know if I was familiar with A/B testing, which is where you put out a feature, you have two versions of it, and you randomly decide whether to show version A or version B to the end user, and then you collect statistics about which one's more successful, which one has more signups. So they asked me some questions about had I done A/B testing before and how might I do that. Whereas at my most recent company, they were looking for managers who could also be kind of product managers and help guide where's the product going to go. So during the interview, on top of the algorithm stuff, they were asking questions kind of related to whether you'd be able to contribute to deciding where to go with the product and how to improve it.
How do you even begin to prepare for a coding interview?
Well, I've been practicing on LeetCode, and I just signed up on Codility because I know I have one of those, and they typically offer you practice tests and then try to get you to sign up to go past the paywall for more practice. Definitely it helps to drill so that when you're up there, whether you're nervous or not, you have that muscle memory. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, it's a lot of fundamentals review and studying. I think we could pass that out at any point. I think I've got like a list with maybe a couple of resources that like might help you study a little bit. But yeah, a lot of it just comes down to practice and repetition, just to get to the point where not only do you feel comfortable with the concepts, you can get to the point that you feel comfortable with the concepts under pressure. You usually are only going to have an hour. They will be looking for you to get working output by the end, if not necessarily like the most optimal solution. So it's important that you can get comfortable really quickly and just ask the right questions to understand the requirements and actually get something that works. But there are a bunch of resources out there to help you practice and help you study and like get a little bit better with this. But the recommendation is definitely like prepare as much as you can in advance. Try to time yourself, try to work through some of the different concepts, work through a study guide, and just ultimately practice.
And do they expect that you should be like talking about what you're thinking about as you go, or are you more just focused on writing code and not having that conversation?
Technically, it's up to you, right? But my recommendation is always going to be that you should talk through your approach. You never know what your interviewer is going to offer in terms of hints or advice, and them getting a better sense of your thought process and your understanding of how you're approaching the problem is a better outcome for you as the candidate. The more that they know and understand the way that you're thinking and can see potentially, okay, maybe you didn't get it exactly correct, the solution, but I could tell that this person was on the right path. They were thinking about it in the right ways. Like that could earn you potentially some, a bonus credit from your interviewer, and that'll come out in maybe like a feedback panel after the fact, right? If you sit there quietly and don't interact with your interviewer at all and just start hammering away on the keyboard, they're probably not going to offer you any hints or advice as to whether you're on the right path, and B, they're not going to get any of that insight into your thought process and potentially your fit or ability, right? They're going to be able to see literally the code that you're typing and whether when you hit the button it actually passes the test and outputs what you expect. So you're sort of, by not speaking out and by not sort of talking through that thought process, you're sort of limiting the signal that your interviewer can get, and you're basically going to need to come up with a perfect solution and certainly be able to answer questions about it at the end anyway.
Yeah, I've rarely worked on a team with less than 4 engineers on that team working closely together. So another thing I think they're looking for is how do you take feedback, if they pick on something that you did or they suggest that you do something differently, do you have an attitude or are you, cool about taking suggestions and modifying what you're doing? I think that's another important part of it.
What other tips or tricks do you have for folks who are preparing to do this?
There's a few that I can think of. The first and foremost is take advantage of your recruiter. Your recruiter or whoever you're working with at whatever company you're applying for, you sort of have aligned interests. They want you to get hired. You want to get hired and do well in the assessment. So if they're not, they may come out and tell you, this is the type of coding question or problem that you would expect to solve. This is the environment that it's going to be in. This is like sort of what you should expect going in. Some of them might not say anything, but would be perfectly willing to share it with you if you asked. So always check with your recruiter before you go to any of these interviews and just ask them, right? What are they willing to share about the process? Ask them, what types of things should I be preparing for? Are there specific subsets of algorithms or data structures that we like to ask questions about? Is the question going to be maybe more of a practical thing as opposed to maybe more theoretical on the computer science side? Try to work with your recruiter to get a better understanding of what you're going to be going into beforehand. I think not enough candidates take advantage of all of the resources that your recruiter probably has at their disposal, and you'd be surprised what they'd be willing to share with you going in. I got a bunch more tips, but you can throw it in if you want.
I would say have a thick skin about it. Towards the beginning of my career, when you're interviewing for junior engineer positions, maybe you'll find something on the first try, but as I've progressed and I've interviewed for director positions or a position where you're in charge of a software suite that has a lot of customers and a lot of data, I probably bombed 2 or 3 interviews before I passed one most of the time. as my career has progressed. Also, it is weird because you would think companies would want to hire someone from a direct resume because they don't have to pay a recruiter. I mean, it depends. If it's an external recruiter, they often pay like 20% of the salary to that recruiter when you get hired. Internal recruiters, the bonus structure varies. So you would think there'd be some advantage to a cold resume because they're not going to pay that fee. But actually, I've had way more success going through a recruiter, including external recruiters. So I don't know if those cold resumes just go to HR and then never make it to hiring manager. As a hiring manager, I've had that experience where I'd go bug HR like, hey, what's going on? And find out they were sitting on 60 resumes and never sent them to me. So I would say, you know, don't get discouraged. You may have to send out 50 resumes, and counterintuitively, your best opportunities may come through these recruiters that companies are going to pay a fee to, and you may bomb a few interviews before you're really feeling good and kind of firing on all cylinders. And I think a lot of us feel imposter syndrome in programming. It's competitive. It can be difficult, but you know, if you're finding that you're able to solve the problems on these practice websites, like, you can do it. So I would just say have a thick skin and don't take it personally. There's many reasons to be turned down. You know, just keep at it. I've felt that way many times, but I've never been out of work long enough to, you know, take an unemployment check. Usually, you know, if you get laid off, you get 3 months of severance. I've always found something in time. I've been doing it, you know, for 20 years. So I would say don't get discouraged. Just kind of keep at it.
I mean, I think to your point, you could say that interviewing is a skill set, right? And it's something that you need to like practice and develop over time. The more that you do it, the better that you get at it, especially as you're getting feedback through the process. So the first time that you're in a coding interview, right, it's going to be probably scary and intimidating, and maybe it still is, right? Like for me, certainly. But the more that you do it, the more that you practice it, the more that you get into those sessions, the more that you understand better what the screeners and the interviewers are looking for and trying to see, the better you get at it, you know, the more you'll see your own skills improve, the easier that it gets over time.
Where in the hiring process does this take place? Do you first meet with somebody for a coding interview as a way to get weeded out if you pass or not pass, or do they generally interview you about your other interests and skills before they do this as a different kind of a test?
I mean, well, unfortunately, like anything else, it varies, right? What I've seen commonly is that you'll have, you know, a screen with the recruiter that won't be very technical. That'll just be an assessment of your background. They'll take some notes and hand them off to the hiring manager, and then the hiring manager will do a screen with you, and that might be a little bit more technical, probably not hands-on coding, but maybe. And then at that point, if you're passed forward, you'll go to sort of a panel round where you'll do multiple different interviews. One of them is usually some kind of a coding assessment of some kind, and that's similar to what we're talking about here. But I've certainly seen places where you'll get some sort of an online coding assessment that you'll need to take before you even get to the hiring manager screen, for example. So it depends a lot on the company and the volume that they get in terms of applicants and what they value in the applicants that they're getting in.
Yeah, 90% of the time I've had the same experience. Half-hour phone screen with the recruiter, half-hour to an hour phone screen with the hiring manager, and then a day where it's going to be like 3, 4, 5 hours, an algorithm section, maybe a case study section, depending what part of your career you're in, and then meeting with like the larger team, like the product manager and the scrum master that you're going to be working with. Although I have at least one process right now for Capital One where they said they're going to give the coding assessment up front. So there's like an hour-long assessment on Codility before I had a half-hour phone screen with the recruiter. So apparently I'm going to do the Codility before speaking with anyone. So it does vary.
Let's take a few minutes and ask some questions, or invite you guys to ask some questions that you might wish, and then after that we will try and stage a coding interview. Jesus.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you do interviews now, correct? Like you interview a lot of candidates. Do you feel like the process has changed from when you graduated in 2014 to now? Because I feel like, first off, there's way more competition now. Most companies, there's usually an online assessment before you even like get past the resume screen and things like that. So how do you think, I guess that scene has changed?
It's a good question. I would say it's, it's always going to be changing, right? Like like any other industry, or certainly anything in technology, nothing is static, right? I think what you're probably seeing right now is that it's especially difficult in the tech market. There's been layoffs across a number of companies where there's really, really good tech talent on the market right now. And I think it's especially challenging maybe for more entry-level positions. So you're probably experiencing some of that right now, which is really tough. But at the end of the day, if you're just looking to get a foot in the door, still the best way to do it is going to be through a referral if you can get it. Referral is still the best way to get through any of these automated screening processes, resume reviews, what have you. To this point, like as a hiring manager, I love referrals because it lets someone like very easily jump up to the top of the queue. And like if I have roles open for, say a software engineering role under me, I might get 300 or 400 applications. And like trying to sort through all of those is actually very difficult. So having the referral come in definitely makes it brings that up to the top of the list for me.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's changed is the moving from in-person to a lot of virtual stuff. Most of the last time I was doing a lot of interviews was between 2 and 4 years ago, and we still had people come in person for a lot of it. I went out and found one junior developer at Launch Academy. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but it's like one of those intensive courses where you can go in 6 months, and at the time it was Ruby on Rails.
Boot camps?
Yeah, it was a boot camp, and I actually found someone who was fantastic. I think he was, he was smart guy. He was like a chemistry major, decided to change careers, and he's now a staff level engineer at IQVIA and doing really well. The other thing I would just say is sometimes the market does dictate a lot of what's going to happen, which is another thing to try not to take too personally. Certainly all this money was pumped into the economy with, I think, at least one too many rounds of stimulus during the pandemic. They overhired. Now, with the interest rates having gone up, it's kind of crashing back down. There's a lot of layoffs all at once. So it probably is a little bit tougher time. And it's easier said than done, but kind of have to not take it too personally if it's a harder job market.
Tell us your name and your question.
Anishka, how did you get like better at coding? And also like, are there any like certifications that are like good to have and like become better at coding, and like your resume is like more appealing?
Sure. I mean, for me, it's all about actually doing it, practicing. Like my father gave me a programming books in high school and was like, you should learn to program. Here's Pascal. And it was pretty much Greek to me. It didn't really click till I was here and I wrote some SQL and I wrote some VB.NET. So definitely, do practice projects. There's a lot of resources online. Try to build an app that displays the weather or, something like that. Number one for me is just putting things into practice.
I mean, that's basically what it comes down to is practice, right? Like you just need to do it, and you need to do a lot of it as much as you can. Now, that being said, depending on the role that you want, or maybe there's a field or a specialty or a particular set of companies that you'd be more interested in, right? They might be hiring for different things, and there might be different places where you would want to focus a lot of that practice and repetition. If you just like Google programming and then just start reading every book that's there or taking every certification, like that may not necessarily put you on the right path to where you want to go. But practice is ultimately just the most important thing. Whatever you can get in the classroom, what you can get in your homework, what you can get just outside, find any opportunity that you can to be practicing.
Yeah, just adding to your question about the certifications, it does seem like the market has, like when I graduated, web development was probably the hot thing. Lately, I'm seeing a lot more listings for data analyst. DevOps is super hot. And I think there's less people who know DevOps inside and out than there are web developers. So yeah, you might want to consider like an AWS certification, which would be, they have a lot of things, a lot of people are on AWS. I don't know what share of the market, but some crazy share of the market is on AWS, or, certainly pick something that you're interested in, so, you'll want to do it, but.
I would say the certifications are a great way to get yourself exposure and experience with something, whatever it is, whether that's DevOps, AWS, web development, any of those things. Like, if there's a certification for anything, it shows a company that you've reached maybe some sort of specific baseline level of knowledge, which is great for the entry level, right? Like, being able to see that on like an entry level resume, I would be like, okay, awesome, this person is actually invested in taking time in doing this stuff at a different level. As you progress in your career, it's going to be more important that you're able to demonstrate actual results, like that you've done something with that technology. Just having the certification is not necessarily like a great green flag or a check mark that will like progress you through. So like you actually need to find ways to take what you've learned through that certification or the courses that you've done and actually apply it either at the company that you're working on or side projects or other things. We want to see it in practice.
Thank you.
We'll take one more question and then we'll move on to the next thing. Ken.
Sorry if this is a bit out of scope, but would you happen to know how coding interviews differ to other IT positions? Like if you were to do a systems analyst, integrations, or cybersecurity, kind of like less from software development specifically?
It's a good question. So that's not necessarily my specialty, right? So like I'm not necessarily hiring for like those business analyst roles, but almost all of those are going to have some sort of a technical component or a technical evaluation. Like I know for the business analyst roles at Wayfair, we're giving you like a problem to solve in the interview, and like we'll want to see you actually do the math to calculate demand management and other things like that, right? So maybe it's not necessarily coding in the way that like we're talking about this being like a coding interview session, but for most of the larger companies, there's going to be some kind of a technical assessment. It'll just probably be focused a little bit more towards that role. Like you may not actually need to write code, or they might ask you to solve something using SQL, for example, or mine some particular insight from a large set of data. Maybe they'll put you in front of like a BigQuery console or something along those lines, right? And for the security side, they are software engineers as well, just in a different context, right? Like it's almost like a different flavor of software engineer, if you will, right? Like, so for a lot of those security roles, you're probably getting some level of coding assessment, but it may be different from a pure software engineering role. And again, this is why I'm like, always talk to the recruiter, like push them for as much information as they're willing to give you. Like, what am I walking into? What is going to be the breakdown of the different interviews? Who am I going to be talking to? What is going to be asked? You'll be surprised about what they'd be willing to share.
Yeah, I did do like help desk and systems administration in college, like CS 101. My professor had me test out and go work at the Bentley help desk actually, and I worked a few different help desks through college, but the same gentleman hired me over to another company while I was still at Bentley, and then I worked for my uncle, my first job out of school as a sysadmin. He knew what I could do. So, but I do have friends who are at a high level now as network administrators and systems administrators. I think my email is going to be on the flyer or something. So if you like, shoot me an email and I can ask them what they've had to do at their most recent interviews, because I do know a few are pretty high up at this point.
Thanks. I want to introduce Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm the undergraduate career coach for CIS and AI, so I know I have a couple faces that I've been working with, but I do have a question for both of you. Can you tell me what an ideal, like what a superstar candidate would look like to you, whether that's both on paper with their resume cover letter and or in an actual coding interview, right? Like we want to make sure that we're prepping our students to ace both of these things. So what an ideal candidate would look like would be helpful.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm looking specifically for demonstrated results, right? Like, so if you're writing your resume What I don't necessarily look for is just a menu of technologies. Like anyone can put any number of technologies on their resume. That doesn't necessarily prove to me that you can come in and do the job that I'm going to be asking you to do. What I love to see is demonstration of like actual results and outcomes. So if it's, as opposed to, developed an app in Golang or whatever, right? Like you developed an app to do something. What did it do? How well did it do it? Those kinds of things. As a student, it might be maybe a little bit more challenging to have those results, but I know like from a classroom perspective, like out of classroom, any of those things, right? I would love to see the projects and the work that you've done and like what outcomes you've actually achieved from the classes that you're in. Like if you've got a capstone project or any of those things, that helps a ton. Now, in terms of like a coding interview, especially if you're in like sort of an entry level role, right? Most companies are not going to be extremely hard on you, I hope. It's certainly going to be competitive, but what we want to see is, A, can you get to the result, right? Like we're asking you a question, by the end of it, you should be focused on, first and foremost, getting to an answer, hopefully the right answer. And then I'd really want to see, can you probe at the depth a little bit more and start to think about things like, are there ways that this could be optimized? Is this the right way or the best way to do this? Are there other approaches that I could have taken? If I might ask you questions about scaling, like if I needed this to run, like this works great at the scale that we're talking about. What if I needed to run this on, 100,000 machines or 1 million machines, right? Depending on what sort of scale you're operating at. Someone that can take into account those sort of different factors and think about it on additional levels beyond just, did I get the correct output, right? Thinking about the way that it could be optimized or scaled or made more reliable. Those would be factors that I'd be looking for.
Yeah, I think in addition to being able to solve whatever problem they put in front of you, I'm looking for a communication style. Can you communicate clearly? Do you name things well, in your code? Maybe at the entry level, or really, it could be at any level. I think something like a personal project doesn't hurt. Something that I can look at that demonstrates how you code, and again, how do you name things. In my personal experience, I've worked with people who are like principal engineers, and maybe they're just off the charts genius, and we're not clicking, but and sometimes these guys are guys who can go into a room and code an app like overnight and get a lot done. But if they write it in such a way that none of my other guys can understand it, and I can't onboard somebody onto the project because they didn't use good naming, so when you're trying to read it, you can't remember what variable's what, or they did it in such a crazy abstract way that my junior or my staff level engineers aren't going to be able to pick it up without staring at it for 2 months, and they're still going to be uncomfortable. Then for me, that's an issue. That's a red flag. Like I don't care really if you're Einstein, if you're not going to be able to work in the group and you're going to write code such that it's not readable and maintainable. I think one thing I actually learned going all the way back to my Bentley days was that 80% of the cost of the software is going to be in the maintenance phase after you've gotten through bootstrapping and getting it off the ground. So it's important that you're able to write code that other folks are going to be able to come in and understand what you did and keep working on it.
Hey Mark, just a quick question. So from a container perspective, because containers seem to have really taken off here in the last 5-6 years. I was dealing with it at Dell when I was working there, but everything's being containerized. Obviously for scalability, automation. Are you guys seeing more and more of that in your spaces? Apps are being containerized?
Absolutely. I mean, so that's effectively the teams that are under me. That's what we do. Like we operate the compute platform for Wayfair that is effectively, it's all based around Kubernetes. Okay. So it's all container based. Almost everything that we do, from local development, production deployments, any of that stuff, even our CI/CD pipelines are operating in containers at this point. Like the portability is just extremely useful, right? Like what you're unifying your runtime and your coding environment, like what you're actually running locally is what you're deploying in production. Like we're using it all over the place.
Yeah, it's big scale plus, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
As your company grows, it's just a matter of, hey, tell Kubernetes I need more of those things. Yeah.
And then it's my job to make sure Kubernetes actually has more of those things.
Okay, we want to move
Yeah,
to the
it is-
next phase of our conversation this afternoon. Anybody want to apply for a job? Anton?
Already have one.
You already have. Yeah. What we'd like to do is give somebody, we want to give someone the opportunity to, Gabby, excuse me. We want to give someone the opportunity to engage in a coding interview experience with Nick and with Alex. Who wants to come up and,
Where are we coding?
what?
Where are we coding? Like on the board?
You can
We're going to ask you some real tough stuff.
They're gonna have some real serious stuff. You can put up a coding online screen thing, we can all see it.
I can try it.
Do it. Yeah.
Okay, is this your on?
You want to drive?
Sure.
I'm sitting.
So you reviewed Jesus' resume. He was a sandbox tutor,
Congrats.
just like you.
You got through the hiring manager screen.
You got through the
Yeah.
first screening.
Thank God.
Okay, so let's say you have a function and the input is an array of integers, and the output needs to be the largest integer in the array. Can you take a shot at writing that function?
So I'm just reiterating. I'm getting the largest integer from that input from that function, right?
Yeah, you're gonna get an array for an input, an array of integers,
Yeah.
and you wanna output the largest integer. in the
Am
array.
I allowed to use built-in functions from my selected programming language, or
Like Max?
am I building this?
Sure, if you have particular knowledge of.
Okay. Well,
You can
normally
use
I
that.
just use the max function on Python.
Sure.
But if I were to build it some other way, I'd probably loop through the array, keep a starting variable that starts at 0 or -1, whichever is the minimum number, and just iterate through that array. And at every point, I'm comparing the index, the integer at that index, to that target variable, and I'm doing a comparison to see, okay, is this bigger than anything I've seen before? And at the end, I just return that one target variable that I initialized at the start.
Sure, so let's say you can't use the max function.
Okay.
Are you comfortable just
Yeah.
taking a shot writing it up?
Or do you want to
Anyone
write something on,
got a-
in an online Python environment on the screen?
Do you have one?
Yeah, go to
Recently?
online Python, go to onlinepython.com. No, online dash Python.
Oh.
Search for online Python if I want.
Yeah, that's on
You
me.
could buy that domain though.
I'm not interested.
Yeah, that
Oh,
one.
there we go. That's nice. Okay,
We'll
perfect.
just make the print bigger so the rest of us can see it.
Yeah. Okay, so first I'll just this. Same.
Hey, just, could you do Control plus plus?
Control plus plus.
Yeah, just try to zoom in a little bit.
I hate
If we
Windows.
can,
Oh, there we go.
The other way.
Oh,
There you go.
there we go. Yeah.
This way?
Yep.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Can anyone
Yeah,
see?
that's
Can. Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Alright. So, like he explained, I'm taking in an array. And what I'm gonna do is, first off, I'm gonna write out some comments, I think, just to kind of get the idea clear. So, we have a target variable. That's, like I said, it's gonna be what I'm gonna return at the end. And then I'd iterate through that array. And I'm essentially doing a comparison. I to target. And if it's bigger, then I would change that value. And then at the end, I would, why is it saying, oh, I'm so sorry. At the end, I would just return target. So if this looks good to you, I'll just go ahead and start coding it.
Yeah.
Perfect. I said, you have a target. We iterate through the array, and we say if num is greater than target, then I'm gonna do that change that I mentioned. Num, and then I return target. Just to make sure that we're doing this right, I would probably come up with like just one example, and we can run through it. Usually the board would be way easier for this, but imagine I had, I don't know, 3, 4, 7, right? We're essentially going through that array, and we're saying, okay, 3 is on the first run. I'm saying, is 3 greater than 0? It is. So then target would equal 3. And then the same would happen with 4 and 7. So at the end, we would just return target.
Define the array and pass it in. Let's see if it
Yeah,
works.
let's do it.
For sure. Whoa. Like I said, I hate Windows. Okay. So here we're just gonna say print max int and pass in something like 5, 6, 7. Okay. Let's try to run this. Oh. Is it here? Yeah, it's nothing here. I think that should be. Oh. Could be good. There you go.
All right. I think you're gonna find a job.
I was gonna say,
If
I
they
feel like
ask
a couple
me
years
this-
you can be up here giving this.
If they asked me this, I would be worried about this company.
Yeah, yeah, they're usually harder, but then you can use the
Yeah,
built-in
yeah.
functions and such.
Yeah.
We just didn't want to coach you
Yeah.
crazy today.
Yeah, I feel you.
But I actually haven't been great about
Oh, I
writing
get a
out
prize?
the.
You do for volunteering. Yeah.
That was good the way you wrote out the process and comments first. I actually haven't been good about that, but as I've been reading lately, everyone says do that first
I
before
just
you
did
write
a
the
mock
code.
yesterday, that's why.
Oh, there you go, yeah,
They
that's a
told
good
me.
idea.
Yeah.
That's basically textbook what you just did there.
Yeah.
I mean, now what your interviewer will probably do is like, oh, okay, so this guy just breezed through it in a few
Ask him
minutes.
another.
Time to make it a little harder, right? Like, and then they probably will have a couple of ways that they can extend the question, make it a little bit more challenging, and maybe like push you to think about things in different ways.
Like, what would you do if your array had 3 negative numbers in it?
It's a great question.
I know, that's why I asked it.
I'd probably start with, there's something in Python called float parentheses negative infinity, so I would start from that value. So that's gonna be the absolute smallest. So I know whatever value I'm gonna put is gonna be greater. So
Because
even if I
your
have
code wouldn't work if you had 3 negative
yeah,
numbers, right?
that's true. But I did ask at the start
Yeah.
if we were including negative values. So.
Or what if we threw a letter in there?
We have time for one?
Whole different code. Yeah, I'd probably ask that at the start. I'm hoping they wouldn't put letters in there.
They might.
Then I'd ask, are we defining max to be like I guess, are we just putting in letters or words? You don't know?
Maybe. I mean, so you're asking the right questions, right? And that's
Yeah.
exactly what you should pressure
Yeah,
test what
yeah.
the interviewer is asking, right? Like make sure that you understand the requirements and make sure that push me as the interviewer to like explain to you exactly the outcome that I'm looking for, right?
Yeah.
Like they should give you a set of like input arrays for you to validate, right? Like maybe some of them will have letters, maybe they'll have words, maybe
Yeah.
they'll whatever, right? Like, and then I guess really the challenge is just validating the input and making sure that, you're taking care of those kinds of things. But like that's the type of like, once we get through, all right, we've got something that works, okay, now
Yeah.
we're going to continue to push on it. And like it'll be difficult or almost pointless to try and optimize further here, but like if this was maybe a more complex challenge, or maybe you're talking about iterating through multiple arrays in multiple dimensions, they'll ask questions about how would you make this perform better, right?
Yeah.
Are there ways, things you could do, like maybe before you actually call the function to just like error out or exit early before you get to the point of like actually doing the computationally intensive bits, right? And as the use cases get like a little bit more complicated, you'll get more and more opportunities to talk proactively about things you might do to optimize. Like
Yeah.
that's a thing that will really stand out to your interviewer, especially for like an entry level role. If you're already talking about like, hey, look, I'm going with a brute force approach here. I want to get to the working answer, and then here are a few additional ways. Like, I want to talk about input validation. I want to talk about different ways in which I could potentially optimize this. Like, doing that proactively is a big time, like, green flag, positive signal that you can send to your interviewer.
Yeah, I do have a question. If you see the question and you know, okay, you kind of know the brute force way to solve it, but you also know an optimized way to solve it, would you like start off with the optimized version or like?
If
how would you
you're
approach that?
really confident in doing it the optimized way, just do it the best way that you know how.
Okay.
But frequently, I don't know, at least in that I've seen or a lot of these interviews that I've proctored, people take on too much of the complexity and jump into early optimizations when they don't need to. Like, you're optimizing too soon. Most important thing is get the working answer first and then optimize it, right? Like, because at the end of the day, they're going back and writing some sort of interview feedback, and the first question they're going to be asked is, did they get the right answer? And that might be, well, he got 75% of the way to a really optimal solution, but we didn't get an answer, right? Like, get the answer first and then output it, right? Like, and then you can talk through the optimization opportunities. But if you already know off the bat, like, I can do this and I can do it in, you know, the OEVent or whatever the most optimal way to do it is, just do it.
Thank you.
We have time for one more person to look for a job. Who wants to have, we have one more interview.
There's got to be one more victim.
We have a prize for the person who's up.
The prize is you have to watch that opening video again.
Ash.
Do it. He won't give you a hard one, we promise.
I could try.
There you go. Come on up. Yeah.
Come on.
All right, we can start easy. If you breeze through it, I have a medium one. But
Would
for
pseudocode work if I just like walk through?
yeah, pseudocode should be
the
fine.
code? Okay.
Well, let's start. Just give the sum of the elements in an array.
Okay, so the first thing I would do is define a function, which takes in the array, and then I would loop through, like, I would first define like a variable, which equates to 0, and then loop through the array, and then keep adding every single like position, like kind of like the value to the 0, and then just loop through like each of those.
Yeah.
steps.
All right. See, that's too easy. Let's try a little harder, and maybe you'll have to write, but it could be pseudocode. But let's say that we give you a string, and you have to tell us if it's a palindrome. You're familiar with a palindrome, where if you
Yeah.
reverse it, it's the same?
Like a race car.
Mhm. For this one, would it just be like looping through and then doing -1 and starting at the end of the loop and then adding that to an empty string and then keep adding it from like every letter from the back?
There's a couple ways to solve it. You want to try writing it, or?
Try it.
Yeah,
We'll give you
I can
hints.
try.
Yeah, we'll help.
You can erase what's up there.
Yeah. Yeah, you can delete what's up there.
Erase what's up there and just type away. You can, if you don't want to write Python, you can just do it in a comment.
So just to clarify the question, would it just be like inverse of the string? So if it's like
You have to figure out
outline?
whether the string reads the same backwards and forwards.
So I think what we
Oh.
want maybe is a function that would return true or false. Like if we pass in a string, it should return true if it's a palindrome and false if not.
Okay. I've definitely seen this one on the code. I would would just like loop through like the string and then maybe just checking the letter at the end and comparing that to the first letter.
Mhm.
And then keep doing that until like it reaches like the middle. Or
You want to try writing it out, or you could even do like the
yeah.
comments first, that we could.
So for here, I would just like put in the string that goes in and then doing like a while loop or like a loop that iterates through the string. And then comparing those, like, I guess the end and then the first. I just don't know how I would do it, but that's like the first thought that came in.
Mm-hmm.
So starting with the first letter and then comparing that with the and then just looking at the last letter and seeing whether that compares. And then just keep looping through each of those until you like reach the middle.
Uh-huh. What kind of loop do you think you want to go for?
I would say like a while loop or a do while. Either of those would work here.
You could. I think then you'd have to track where you're at a little more manually than if you do
Yeah.
a for loop. Might be a little easier because you know you're going to go from 0 to at least to the middle of the string.
Yeah, so like a for loop. And then
Can you iterate over a string letter by letter like that in Python, or do you need to do something first?
I guess like I think you could do that in Python or
I don't actually know.
Yeah, I think so.
This is why you pick Python.
I know you can in Ruby.
yeah, but just using like quotation marks and then comparing that is what I would say. But yeah, this is where like I'm a little confused. Just comparing the last letter. And then keep on like iterating that and going on to the second letter and then do that from the other side of the string. Like
So
from the end.
you're iterating forwards through the
Yeah.
letters, and then you're comparing it with what exactly?
So the first letter gets compared to the last letter, and then just
How are you getting the last letter? I think you might need, do you need another loop?
or could I just convert the string into like an array and then do like -1 and then start through
Sure.
that?
If you want to go letter by letter, that would
Yeah.
work.
I guess just like splitting the string into like individual letters and then turning that into an array and then comparing that using -1 and then just going from the other side.
That's a good approach.
I think that would work.
And then just returning like just looking through the array and then just seeing whether the first says 0 equates like -1 and then doing like 1 and then the other side.
The one being the index in the array.
Yeah. And then you just keep doing that until would the midpoint, would that be just sum of the array divided by 2, or if it's like an odd number, I guess it would be like,
Well, you shouldn't, do you really need the midpoint for anything?
just to see where it kind of ends.
You at
Like
least
a
need
string.
to test it. Like test level and race car.
Right. I mean, so you could, if you wanted to talk about an optimization, you could check really quick at the beginning about whether they're actually the same length or not, the two things that you're comparing.
Yeah. But yeah,
Well, I mean, a palindrome would have to be the same. Like, we're literally just reversing the same word. Duh.
would there just be like one word or two?
No,
words?
just one word.
Okay.
I'm making it even
Yeah,
harder,
so
which I don't
they're
even do.
just like kind of saying that there's like, I don't know. If it's just like BOB, then I guess looking, like converting that into an array, like the midpoint is kind of 1, the index is 1, so just looping through until it reaches that index, and then that's when you know you've reached the middle,
Mhm.
and then if it matches, then it's like palindrome, and if not, then it's not.
Good.
Yeah?
That's not. I like your thought process a lot. We'll save you from having to write the code for it though. Who here is taking Python? Okay, Python gurus. Who can optimize this by writing this function in one line of code? Not you. You guys.
Oh, me?
Yeah, you got it.
Oh, yeah, I think it's called reverse.
No, you can't use it. No, no reverse function.
I can't?
No, you only use max before it's cheating twice.
I can't use reverse.
No.
I think there's some like indices splitting like with a -1 or something
Yes.
that you taught us. I can't remember that though. I would probably use reverse.
Write this down. S equal if. You just do, if S is your string, you do if S, you return S equals S brackets, no, square brackets, colon, -1.
Yeah.
Because the expression on the right reverses the string, and then you check to see if it equals the original.
Yeah.
Okay, I got hired. Any last comments or questions before we stop today for either of our panelists about coding interviews?
Well, if you wrote that code in my coding interview, I'd ask, you know,
You'd probably for it.
how would you explain that to some junior engineer or?
Take my class.
It's like, all right, this guy, he's a Python expert.
Yeah. No, that's actually a good point. You don't want to write cryptic code, not nice code are great, but
It's very clever.
it's trying to find the balance between them, right?
Yep.
I make sure I commented that one for sure.
It's interesting because every language has its own idiosyncrasies, right?
Right.
So people who live and breathe Python every day
We'll know exactly what that does.
know exactly what it is, but I don't, and Nick obviously doesn't, so explain it to me.
Yep.
Sure.
What is this missing that I do?
I'm not gonna debug your code now, but we can do that later. That's my code? Oh, you didn't write a program for it. You have to write the rest of the program. You have to write the function. That's just a condition to test if the string is equal to its reverse.
Oh.
But we didn't write the rest of the function that goes around it.
Interesting.
The way that works is it uses substrings, and the colon, the value, there's no value before the colon, so it means start at the beginning. There's no value between the two other colons, so that goes to the end, and then the colon, the -1 at the end means go in reverse.
I like the dot reverse better.
Yeah, I thought you might. Let's do that video again. Any other questions, comments, thoughts about something you learned today about preparing for coding interviews?
I do have a question.
Okay.
Do you have this like as a doc? Because we can't access these links.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
Oh, we'll post this on the Sandbox website.
Yeah, and I can email it out to everyone who attended, as well as a copy of the video, the recording too.
We'll post the video online. Professor Babayan.
Great to see you guys here. Question, how much the use of copilots and AI is fair game in interviewing. I mean, I have no clue, right? And I'm in front of a classroom that I'm trying to justify teaching, learning to problem solve. This is a great help because it says problem solving in the first paragraph. Genuinely, what is allowed level for example, for those pre-screening problem sets, is GPT allowed or not? Do you see it being allowed in your company for interviewing or not at all? What's the range there?
It depends. Some places will tell you, please don't use it. Some places will be like, you can use Google, you can use large language model, you can use whatever resources you want. You need to be able to get to the right answer, and you need to be able to explain it, right? So I think that's where it sort of doesn't matter to an extent. Like if the ChatGPT can just write the code and produce the answer for you, but you can't explain how or why it's working the way that it is working, or that the potential optimizations for it, or what have you, right? You're sort of running the risk of creating something that you can't work with or understand. I mean, I think it's going to become more and more commonplace that people use it, or it's expected that people are using it for these interviews or different things like that. Because certainly within my company, we're giving out Copilot licenses. We're encouraging everybody to be using Gemini and Code Assist and all of these different tools, right? We want people to be using it, but we also need to hire people that are smart enough and have the problem-solving skills and whatnot to understand this is the right place to apply it. How do I validate the output that it's giving me? How do I understand that this helps me solve the problem in the right ways with the right outcomes? Those kinds of things. So, I mean, and it might help you pass a really generic coding assessment, can you produce a function that does XYZ thing? But I think for most of the coding assessments where you're doing it live with someone who has some experience, they'll be able to poke holes in it if you are not able to articulate why you're submitting that code, or why suddenly, the interviewer is looking at the same terminal you are, you're getting just a big block of code just suddenly gets copy and pasted in there. Wait a minute, how did you come up with this?
Or if it does not work, which happens sometimes, and then you don't know why.
I mean, it might hallucinate some, built-in function that doesn't exist, right? You're sort of running a risk. But I think, if you could talk to your interviewer ahead of time, not necessarily ahead of time, but during the process, and be like, hey, I'm going to use ChatGPT to do XYZ specific thing as it relates to solving this problem. I'm asking it for this thing. As part of this, and I understand what it's going to produce and why it's going to produce it, and here's why I want to use it in this case. That may even be seen as a positive in some cases.
Thank you.
Make sure it's allowed first.
Thank you all for coming today. Big thanks to the Career Services folks and Melissa for helping to arrange this, and to Alex and to Nick for coming back.